Two foreign-owned Japanese corporations control over 85% of every beer sold in Australia. Not 50, not 60, 85%. The beer your father drank at the local, the brand on the stubby you cracked at the footy, the money you spent on it didn't stay in Australia. Here's what makes it worse. Some of those same corporations have quietly bought up the craft breweries you switched to when you decided to stop drinking mainstream. The brands that marketed themselves as small and independent are now subsidiaries of the exact same multinationals. Your money still ends up in the same overseas pockets. And while all this has been happening, beer labels in Australia are under no legal requirement to list their full ingredients. No ingredient panel, no processing aids disclosure. You are drinking a product that the law allows to hide what went into it. We've tracked the ownership chains, the adjunct ingredients, and the labeling tricks of major beer brands. What we found should change what you put in your fridge. 5 brands that betray Australian beer culture. 3 that are actually worth your money. Let's expose it. Number 5. Victoria Bitter, VB. Victoria Bitter has been marketed as the working Australian's drink since 1958. Sold on the back of a cold hard day's work, Australian iconography, and cultural identity. But most people have never stopped to ask who actually owns it. Carlton and United Breweries owns VB, and CUB is owned by Asahi Breweries, a Japanese multinational headquartered in Tokyo. The brand that built its entire identity around the Australian worker has been foreign-owned since 2020 when Asahi paid $16 billion to acquire it from AB InBev. Being foreign-owned becomes a problem when you're sold a product on the basis of Australian identity while every profit flows offshore. That's not a minor detail. That's the core of what's being sold to you every time you grab a VB. VB is classified as an adjunct lager, brewed with cheap grain alternatives like corn, rice, and glucose syrups instead of barley malt. These reduce costs and thin the body of the beer. Asahi has never published a full ingredient breakdown. Under SAN standards, beer isn't required to carry a full ingredient list. Long-term drinkers have noted the taste has shifted significantly from the 1970s and 1980s. What used to be a genuinely bitter, full-flavored lager has become progressively lighter and blander as cost reduction took priority. The marketing has never changed, the product quietly has. Number 4. Great Northern Original. Great Northern is Asahi's most successful launch in decades, overtaking VB as one of Australia's best-selling beers. Built entirely on an outdoor Queensland image, kayaks, fishing trips, the reef, the open sky. The branding is polished. None of it reflects where or how the beer is actually made. Great Northern is brewed at Asahi's Yatala Brewery in Queensland, but it's explicitly an adjunct lager, a product built around using cheap grain alternatives to reduce production costs. The beer's lighter body and marketing claims are not the result of craft innovation. They're the result of using less of the expensive stuff. Here's the real issue. Great Northern was not a long-running Queensland institution. It launched in 2010. The name, the heritage suggestion, the rugged North Queensland identity, all of it was constructed by a marketing department at a multinational corporation. There was no Great Northern Brewery that grew up alongside the cane fields. There was a boardroom decision to create a brand that felt like there had been. Asahi was previously fined by the ACCC for misleading geographic origin claims. In 2014, they were fined $20,400 after being found to have misled consumers about Byron Bay Pale Lager's origin. Great Northern is a product of that same corporate reflex. The name implies heritage, the imagery implies authenticity. Neither is true. Number 3. XXX Gold. XXX Gold is Queensland's most culturally embedded beer. In certain parts of the state, it is practically currency. At 3.5% ABV, it's been positioned as the responsible everyday drink. And because it is everywhere, people have stopped asking where it actually comes from and who profits from. XXX is owned by Castlemaine Perkins, a subsidiary of Lion. Lion is owned by Kirin. Kirin is a Japanese multinational headquartered in Tokyo. So XXX Gold, the beer arguably most embedded in Queensland identity, is owned by a Japanese corporation. Every can sold generates profit that ends up in Japan, not Queensland. Castlemaine Perkins operates out of the Milton Brewery in Brisbane, but operational presence is not the same as ownership. The decisions about pricing, ingredients, and profit distribution are made by Lion, directed by Kirin. XXX Gold is an adjunct lager. The corn and grain profile comes through in the flavor, light, clean, engineered to be inoffensive and highly drinkable at low cost. That's not an accident. That's a deliberate formulation decision by a corporation optimizing for margin. Number 2. James Squire. James Squire is marketed as craft beer, premium heritage, artisan. The range is named after Australia's first commercial brewer, a colonial-era convict who established a brewery in the late 1700s. The branding is built on that historical story. Historical fonts, colonial aesthetic, a sense of provenance. James Squire is owned by Lion, which is owned by Kirin Holdings. It is a product of a Japanese multinational. It was created following Lion Nathan's acquisition of Han Brewing in the early 1990s. The Malt Shovel Brewery in Sydney, which produced James Squire for decades, was closed by Lion in August 2024. Production moved to Lion's other facilities. What you're buying when you pick up a James Squire is a mainstream corporate product brewed at an industrial facility by a Japanese multinational carrying the name and aesthetic of Australia's colonial brewing heritage. The story on the label is real. The independent brewery implied by that story is not. The Independent Brewers Association has called out this practice of large corporations using craft aesthetics and heritage branding to position themselves as small businesses. James Squire is one of the clearest examples of a product that uses the language of craft brewing without any of its substance. Number 1. Hahn Super Dry. Hahn Super Dry earns the top spot not just because of who owns it, but because of how deliberately it has been sold to you. It is a foreign-owned corporate beer masquerading as both Australian and a health decision. Hahn Brewery was founded in 1988 by Dr. Charles Hahn in Camperdown, Sydney. In 1993, Lion Nathan purchased the brewery. Lion is owned by Kirin Holdings, the Japanese multinational that completed its acquisition in 2009 for approximately $2.5 billion. Every can of Hahn since then has generated profit for a Japanese corporation. Production was moved to the Chewy's Brewery in Auburn, NSW. The Camperdown site where Charles Hahn built his reputation is not where the beer is made anymore. The name and story of an independent Sydney brewery are being used to sell a product produced at a multinational's industrial facility. Lion has built the entire commercial identity of this brand around the idea that it is a smarter, healthier choice. Low-carb, active lifestyle. The website talks about cycling to work, going for a run. Hahn Super Dry has been positioned deliberately as the beer for people paying attention to what they put in their bodies. Here is what that marketing doesn't tell you. The way Hahn Super Dry achieves its low carbohydrate content has nothing to do with superior ingredients. It comes from an extended brewing process that allows yeast to ferment out almost all residual sugars. More fermentation time, lower carbohydrates. It is a production technique, not a health innovation. The beer sits at 4.6% ABV, identical to most standard full-strength lagers. What you're getting in the name of watching your carbs is a beer with the same alcohol content as mainstream lagers made by a Japanese multinational with reduced carbohydrates achieved through extended industrial fermentation, without disclosing any of that on the can. The combination is what makes this number 1. Japanese corporate ownership, false independent Sydney heritage, production consolidated into Lion's industrial network, and systematic marketing to health-conscious Australians using language that obscures rather than clarifies what they're actually drinking. The can does not volunteer any of that. Under Australian law, it doesn't have to. Everything you've seen so far represents what's wrong with Australian beer culture. Foreign ownership, industrial processing, and misleading heritage claims. But 3 brands break the pattern. These are the beers that actually deserve your money. Number 3, Gage Roads Brew Company. Founded in Fremantle in 2002, one of Australia's largest genuinely independent breweries. They listed on the ASX in 2006, and in 2009, Woolworths acquired a 25% stake. But in 2016, Gage Roads bought those shares back as part of what they explicitly called their returning to craft strategy. They chose to go back to being independent. That choice matters. Gage Road Single Fin Summer Ale has been one of the most recognised independent craft beers in Australia. Their operation out of Palmyra in Western Australia is a genuine local business with genuine local employment and genuine local ownership of profits. When you drink a Gage Roads beer, you support one of the breweries that has spent over 2 decades proving independent craft brewing can compete in a market dominated by multinational giants. They bought their independence back. They've held it. Number 2, Mountain Culture Beer Company. Founded in 2019 in Katoomba, New South Wales, Mountain Culture has built a reputation for serious brewing, award-winning IPAs and hazy pales with a production philosophy that prioritizes flavor over cost efficiency. In 2023 and 2024, Mountain Culture won multiple awards at the Australian International Beer Awards. Mountain Culture is not owned by Lion, Asahi, Kirin, or Woolworths. It is a genuinely independent Australian business. It's harder to find than mainstream brands because it doesn't have the pouring contract leverage that major breweries wield. You'll find it at independent bottle shops and specialty retailers. If a beer is hard to find, it's often because it hasn't sold out to the system that controls distribution. The brewing is done at their facility in the Blue Mountains. The beer travels directly from that brewery to the glass. There's no corporate supply chain between a Tokyo boardroom and your fridge. That's exactly the kind of product worth supporting. Number 1. Coopers. There is a reason Coopers comes up every time this conversation happens. They are the only major Australian brewery that has remained genuinely independent, family-owned since Thomas Cooper brewed his first batch in South Australia in 1862. 6 generations of the Cooper family have run this brewery through 163 years of industry consolidation and multinational buyouts. Every time a competitor sold out, Coopers didn't. The brewery is still based at Regency Park in South Australia. The family still owns it. The profits stay in Australia. The product is made with no additives and no preservatives, a claim Coopers trademarked and backed up for decades. The secondary fermentation in the bottle creates the famous sediment and eliminates the need for artificial preservatives or added carbonation. The process is slower and more expensive than the industrial approach. Coopers does it anyway because it produces a better beer and because the family's name is on every bottle. Coopers Sparkling Ale, Pale Ale, and Best Extra Stout are all products of genuine traditional brewing. All malt, naturally conditioned, no adjuncts, no preservatives. You can roll a sparkling ale before you pour it, watch the yeast rise from the bottom, and know that what you're drinking is beer the way it was made before it became an industrial product. Coopers holds approximately 5% of the Australian beer market. It earned that share by brewing good beer for over a century and a half without selling out to a single multinational. In an industry where independence has been systematically bought and rebranded out of existence, that is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. If you are buying one single beer brand and you want to know your money stays in Australia in an independent family operation, this is the one.